So, we come to this compare and contrast episode on the back of our Howard Hawks episode. Though the film that brought us here wasn't actually directed by Howard Hawks. Unless you listen to certain people involved with the film, in which case it actually was directed by Howard Hawks. Or it really wasn't, according to some. Or wasn't, but may as well have been, according to others still. But, well, I'm sure we'll come to that.
Yes, we may never know.
What is certain, though, is that we're looking not at 2 films, as is usual for this strand, but 4. An entire 50% of which even have more than one identifiable character with a describable personality, all of which are adaptations of John W. Campbell Jr.'s 1938 novella Who Goes There? Who Goes There is the story of a creature, or thing, from another planet that is able to perfectly mimic other life forms, and that causes havoc when it is introduced to the population of an isolated scientific research station in the Antarctic, where it starts a mimicking and a killing. As the population decreases, so the fear, suspicion and paranoia of the survivors increases. I'm sure that sounds very familiar to you, due to the most famous and most faithful adaptation of the source, John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. 2 of the other films provide somewhat different takes on the novella, with the first, something of a slasher/monster movie, being an unlikely propaganda piece of post-World War II America, the age of the rise of processed food, that presaged the coming of the TV dinner, as Big Ready Meal surreptitiously warned consumers of the dangers of fresh vegetables.
Tenuous.
Yes.
I'll allow it, but final warning.
The second is like Monster on the Orient Express, a horror film starring 2 legends of the genre and, for some reason, Telly Savalas, that puts the action on a train and neatly bridges the nature of the previous film and the next, which is Carpenter's, by bringing back a little of the mimicry and making the intellectual threat of the thing considerably more convincing than Hangry Carrot. We must also, I suppose, because I really can't see any way out of it, and I've looked, talk about the 2011 Pre-Make. Ostensibly a prequel to The Thing, it is, to all intents and purposes, a remake, but substantially inferior in every possible way. There's no perfect and indistinguishable mimicry going on here, though I do suggest purging it with fire in any case. To begin with, though, of this story of isolated people being slowly picked off by a creature from the deep, well, the deep of space anyway, we'll go back to Howard Hawks and begin our discussion with The Thing from Another World, which started it all. Craig, take it away.
How does the plot line of this differ from any of the others? So it's a vegetable, which you've pointed out already, and that's about it. So the plot of all 3 of these films is essentially absolutely identical. However, they differ in some respects. I think the big thing that differentiates this is that, well, first of all, let me say that I was a big advocate for this film previously, and I think when we last spoke about The Thing, I was quite enthusiastic about The Thing from Another World, and I have very fond recollections of my previous experience with it. And I went to rewatch it last week for the first time in quite some time, and I think it's fair to say I've cooled off on it quite a bit, to be honest with you. It sits quite comfortably in B-movie territory, although I say that having no notion of how this was marketed or presented or conceived back in 1951, I think. It comes across as rather run-of-the-mill, and yes, the terror it transpires is actually a vegetable, because the big mistake that I think this incarnation makes is it does that 50s sci-fi thing of feeling that it has to explain and justify everything to an audience, which just ends up being a huge misstep, because the justification turns out to be absolutely ridiculous and kind of removes any sort of tension or terror from proceedings. I don't know how audiences in the 50s reacted to this film, whether or not they felt the sort of fear or revulsion that the later John Carpenter installment certainly gave the 3 of us as youngsters. But I can't particularly imagine at the point at which you're shouting about the thing actually being a vegetable that it doesn't have some negating effect on the psychological terror and its impact. But Yeah, I guess movies then felt compelled to do that. And really, I think it would be a far better endeavour if everything were left to the imagination and no explanation were given, because quite often fear comes from a lack of explanation and a lack of understanding. And I think it would probably fare a lot better under those circumstances. I still quite enjoy it from a sort of camp standpoint. And I do think it's tragic that they struggle so much to defeat this vegetable enemy when just a scant sort of 30 to 40 years later, cable TV and satellite TV were full of infomercials selling kitchen utensils that would have been great weapons against this menace. But yeah, it's an interesting artifact, certainly, and hard to watch it now without a sense of disappointment. I kind of wish I had let this one reside in the memory, but that's the commitment I have to you, listeners.
Yeah, I was quite looking forward to seeing this. I hadn't seen it before, and I know that this is actually quite a big influence on John Carpenter, and films of that era influenced him a lot. And it's one of the reasons he made the remake in 1982. And I just thought it was honestly really dull. This is one of my largest problems with it. I think my single biggest problem, though, is that it kind of, for some reason, has stripped out the single most interesting thing about the story, which is the paranoia because you don't know who's human or not.
Yeah.
That entire thread is taken out of this, so you've got nothing. It's a monster beating down the door. So,
It's replaced by a guy lumbering slowly towards you. It's like, okay. Not quite the same effect on it, really.
And the other thing is when you have the I think one of the key things about it is that while it's a monster and appears monstrous in certain situations to humans, it's always remarked on about it being intelligent, because in some of the other adaptations it'll try to hide traces of itself. It's because it doesn't want to get caught. It wants to survive and thrive and leave the planet or infect the planet, whatever it is in whichever case. And
well, largely it just wants to be left alone to go in peace.
So another one's like you believe the intelligence that it's an alien intelligence, but it's a smart thing. It's hiding. It can build spaceships apparently, so it is smart. And in this is like they keep on pressing on about how intelligent it is, and it completely outstrips our intellect. It can bang down doors. It's all it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, those big meat hands that are so great at just smashing doors to pieces. You can see how they put together an elaborate mechanical interstellar travel device, Yeah.
I think if you were able to, if the film was able to kind of deliver on the promise of what all the scientists were saying at the time, then it could have been a good film. But essentially, at the end of it, it's just Frankenstein lumbering towards people with occasional trips to the greenhouse.
But I mean, Frankenstein is a tragedy. Because
so is this in a lot of respects.
Well, yes, but not in the same way, because Frankenstein's monster, the creature, is a tragic thing. He's created and didn't want to be. He's no parents. There's no way to get love, and it's a very tragic story. Whereas in this is like, there's a big walking carrot coming through the door. Okay, I mean, and there are some genuinely creepy ideas still in there, like the idea that he's taken two of the people, strung them up basically as blood bags. To drain them of blood to feed the seedlings basically that have come from its own body. And like, you don't see that. I guess maybe you're expecting to see that in 1951 is not sensible, not reasonable, but it's like there were some kind of creepy ideas in there, but then it's like, no, it battered down the door. It's like, okay. And if I cared about a single character, well, I say if I cared about there was a single character. There's the idiot scientist, Dr. Carrington. And some people, I don't remember any of them apart from the guy who really, really can't act. The guy that plays the captain, who seems to be in an incredible hurry to deliver all of his lines.
Kenneth Tobey.
Doesn't let any, like most of the film doesn't really let any dialogue breathe, but him in particular, he starts off, they're in the, why this film needed a setup for them getting out there, I have no idea.
No, I tell you what else I'm not sure why it needed it, Drew, and again it relates to Kenneth Tobey and his weirdly anodyne delivery and interaction with everything, is the love interest they try to set up between his character and Margaret Sheridan's character, Nikki, I think. the sort of secretary at the station. I'm not sure what role she's fulfilling. I'm not 100% clear. She seems to be there at the Arctic just to hammer away on a typewriter for some reason.
Yeah.
And they are set up as having had this sort of perhaps previous relationship or something, but it's all weirdly clinical and anodyne, and
also
it doesn't amount.
He was groping her. It's like, it was okay for me to grope you because I really liked you. So that's what that comes down to.
Yeah, pretty much. But it's for nothing as well. It doesn't develop into anything, and there's no payoff.
There were no characters. And I mean, when there's a threat coming in, you recognise her because she's one of the two women that are there. So it kind of like, you tell the difference. Everybody else is basically the same person.
Like there's no reason for
there's no characters.
What's his name? Yeah, there's no reason for Ned, the newspaper guy, the journalist. There's no reason for him to be there. No, that's
it's like, he's man with glasses. Basically, he doesn't really have a character. That's one of my big problems with this film. Is like there are no memorable characters apart from Dr. Carrington, the supposed scientist who makes the irrational, stupid decisions, which is kind of intellectually offensive. But going back to Kenneth Tobin, just when they're in the officer's mess or whatever it is at the start, and they're playing cards, it just like he starts one of his first lines. They're playing cards. His opponent, his opposite player, puts down two queens. It was two queens. It was that's what I thought. Two aces. That's how he delivers it, and his delivery doesn't change much for the rest of the film. It's like he's in a desperate rush. It's like when he's in slightly longer scenes, he seems to slow down a bit, but he just seems to be in a rush to get it out, and there's nobody else really acting any better than that in the rest of the film. So yeah, and then just it's weird. It's like you were saying, Scott. Like it feels like it's trying to have to explain things a lot, and it seems like it's trying to suggest like there's some sort of scientific basis, and they're talking about, oh no, you're scoffing at this being based on a vegetable, but think of all these plants that eat
insects and stuff. Yeah,
they don't do it through smarts, folks. But okay, no. But then
they don't do it by kicking indoors.
But these same people, when they go to find the spaceship buried in the ice, and they go, the Geiger counter's at the maximum. Well, let's definitely all go down and walk into that then. That seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Do you understand what Geiger counters do? I'm guessing not.
I'm glad you brought up Carrington, because he was at least sort of vaguely interesting. Robert Cornthwaite does quite a good job of making him that sort of ambiguous scientific archetype who might be a force for good, might be a force for evil, as it turns out, just as apparently completely nihilistic. He delivers about the only interesting aspect of the movie is where he tries to convince them all that, well, look, in a choice between killing this thing and allowing ourselves to all be killed, we'd be doing mankind a disservice if we don't all allow ourselves to be murdered. And there's like, well, okay, so there's at least a kernel of an interesting debate to be had there, but again, nothing comes of it. So
yeah, it's like other films have had that kind of idea, like a scientist becomes so enamored of the beauty of the specimen. Like look at the xenomorph and Aliens or something. A couple of characters in that series, it's like, this is such a thing of beauty. But he's kind of come to this conclusion in about 72 minutes.
Yeah.
He's come to this conclusion because at the time there was a lot of people who were worried about science, and so therefore he needs to do this because he's tired, I think was the excuse.
I think that's pretty much it, yeah.
Also, yeah, it's like that character just stuck out to me in so many ways. A very strange costume choice. Like this doctor who's dressed as a sailor for some reason with pyjama bottoms on. I mean, I assume they're meant to be some sort of insulated warm trousers, but they read completely as PJs. Like, what? I can't take this man seriously.
Don't be dissing Carrington's style, man. That is red hot on trend. I've since I watched this film last week, I've been to our head office twice wearing that exact same outfit and been complimented on it. Yeah, it's just a weird thing. It's just a weird artifact, actually, and I'm kind of I wish I'd left it just to, like I say, I wish I'd left it just to reside in my memory where it was perfectly comfortable and I had enjoyed it a lot. But that's what I guess 15 to 20 years of space will do for you.
I got a little more out of it than you two guys this time. I'd not seen this before, and it was, I thought, at least vaguely interesting. The primary criticism we've already covered in ad nauseum, that the threat is not particularly threatening or convincing. But other than that, I liked a lot of it. I didn't mind the dialogue being so quick fire and sort of running over the top of each other, and it still had enough kernels of what you liked from the thing to kind of make it at least interesting in that regard. But at the same time, I can't really recommend anyone rush out and see it. It's overall not enough fun, really. And ultimately, the threat's just not strong enough to really compel you to the end of the film. It doesn't outstay its welcome, I suppose, so it's easy enough to get through if you did want to do it out of curiosity. But yeah, I wouldn't make it a priority.
You touched on, sorry, just before we move on, you touched on something briefly there, Scott, that actually I noted the other night, and I'd almost forgotten to mention it. You're saying about people sort of talking over each other and whatnot. That really stuck out on this viewing for me. There are a lot of conversations where people are talking over each other, and I don't think it's necessarily a Sorkin-like choice. Do you think that is by design, or do you think that a lot of this was just, listen, we've got one take to do this in? And if people have fluffed the timing on their lines, I really wasn't sure. I really wasn't sure.
I mean, it happens so much, like all the way throughout it, that it seems to have been a design choice rather than a continual accident. Because I'm sure at some point they might have noticed this and told people to take a beat if they were intending to have this, have dialogue delivered as is normal in films, where people stop and the next person starts, just to aid audience comprehension, even if that's not completely realistic, because in real life people do talk over each other as we often do. But I'm sure it must have been a decision, because Hawks is, in particular, has previous with this, because His Girl Friday had a fair amount of this kind of quick-fire dialogue running into each other as well. So I'm expecting it was a choice rather than an accident. Yeah. But
it was His Girl Friday, exactly. I was thinking about Scott's, like, wonder if that was the Hawks influence. But in His Girl Friday, it's a back and forth. It's a quick-fire back and forth. Here it's like everybody's just saying the lines at the same time.
Yeah. True.
So whether that's trying the same thing with considerably less competence from the actors is possible, or from the director, but it might have been the intent, but the script just isn't smart enough to really warrant having this kind of banter going through it, if you like. It's weird, though, given that the script did come from Charles Leder and uncredited work again from Ben Hecht. It's like, there's really talented people involved with this behind the camera, so I'm not quite sure how it got so wrong on camera. Strange, like, whether it was a case of if Hawks was sort of directed by proxy and things are getting lost in translation there, or I don't know. It's weird, but again, the biggest feeling for me is just that they stripped out the paranoia, which is the entire point. So yeah, it's just a completely useless film from that regard.